And I seen this deer laying over there. It was the deer that I'd shot the night before. But it was torn completely in two. Like not cut, torn. Like something grabbed hold of the hind quarter and the front quarter and just pulled it in two pieces.
I heard this boom. As soon as I heard, I recognized the wood knocking. When I got up, just to the base of the cliff, there was a mine.
So we're here with an eyewitness to the Bell Hill Beast. Now, Terry, what I wanted to ask you, or tell you actually, is when we first got down here, one of the biggest local legends here is of the Bell Hill Beast. I put something online on I Am From Weirton, and boy, the people just came out. Yeah, we've heard about the Bell Hill Beast. No one knew exactly what it was. They talked, hey, this is everything from a Black Panther to possibly an alien, or possibly Bigfoot. So could you tell us about your encounter, because you're going to be the first person ever to speak on the Bell Hill Witness on camera. So if you want to give us your...
Sure. First off, my farm is located right at the base of Bell Hill. It's a 100-acre farm. It was just a simple farm. My grandfather had headed a cattle, few chickens, livestock. So grew up a farm boy out there in the country. The Bell Hill actually encircles probably about half of my farm altogether. But the incident that really stands out in my mind, I've heard about the Bell Hill Beast most of my life growing up out there. It was a joke amongst kids, don't be out late after dark because the Bell Hill Beast will get you, stuff like that. And we just never really thought much about it. My cousin and I was raised by my grandparents, and because all of our parents worked and everything, so we was raised together, similar to brothers. We spent a lot of time together growing up. Well, we made friends with two local boys that was our ages. The one brother was my age. The other brother was 3 years younger, the same age as my cousin. So we just kind of clicked and formed a little group. So summertime hit and we decided that we wanted to go onto our farm and build a little fort or a cabin or some structure just to camp and hang out for the summer. So we gathered our tools and everything, went up onto my farm, and there is one hill that has a real deep ravine. And we decided to make that our structure, for the cabin. It was midsummer, I'd say mid-July. Two friends of ours came out to stay and we got all of our stuff gathered up. We was going to go up and camp for the night. We walked up to the farm, and when we approached the cabin, we noticed that the cabin was destroyed. The wood was all tore apart. Everything was just mangled and discarded in every direction. At first, we thought it was my uncle that did it. So we went back to the farm. We asked, why'd you tear our fort down? He said, I didn't touch it. So we were starting to gather stuff up, and we heard some noise, some undescribable sounds coming from up on top of the hill where we was working. So we decided to all walk up on top of it to see what it was. There was low murmurs. There was, like almost a growlish sound we heard. So we walked up to the top of the hill. We didn't see nothing. I thought, no, we're gonna walk around and look anyway. So the hill leveled off up on top. There was a field up on top. We started to walk through the field, and we noticed one bush start shaking, and we heard, this growling sound behind it. We all stopped dead in our tracks, and we were looking at this bush. And I seen a figure kind of lean out from the bush, almost to kind of peek around it. As we walked up towards the bush, all four of us was there. as we got probably within 15, 20 feet of it, we did notice a very heavy musky odor, sweaty, unlike anything I smell on normal livestock. Just then, whatever was behind the bush jumped out, and I seen a man-figured object. He was head to toe in fur. It was almost the color of orangutan fur, a dark reddish color, knotted, matted. As he moved out from the bush, I just yelled, "Run!" We turned around, we took off running back the direction we came, and I could hear the footsteps, coming behind us. They were very loud, thumping.
So it's chasing you.
Basically chasing us off of that plateau. We started down the bank, and my grandfather had an old piece of fencing there. The three of us didn't have a choice, but we had to dive to crawl under it. I was the last one in the group. The other three was in front of me. They went through. As I went through, my shirt got snagged. I tried to wiggle free of it. I started to panic. The other boy ran over and unhooked it, but as he did, I looked. I could still see this object coming down the hill towards us. And I know it sounds cliche, but it literally, almost every image I've ever seen of a Bigfoot type animal, that fit the description. Broad shoulders, very muscular. It was just an immense animal, being. Once I got free, I just started to scream, run to the house, run to the house. We ran to the house, and my uncle and my grandparents were there. We went in, we told them what happened. We were literally four hysterical kids. I mean, just all screaming at once. And, it took them a few minutes to understand what was going on, because they thought one of us got really bad hurt or whatever. But, they were looking at us. There's no blood. There's no nothing, other than a few scrapes and scratches from running through the brush. The incident was long enough to ingrain in my mind to this day. The image, the whole scenario, it still stays in my mind to this day.
At least by you coming forward, then hopefully more people in this area, and they'll tell us, hey, we did have a sighting or these things happen. So it's important for us also to document this, because it's one thing for people to talk about it. It's one thing also for someone like you who actually saw what this thing is, and you do believe it's a Bigfoot.
Oh, I totally believe it. And I consider myself an intelligent man, educated. I love science. So believe me, I've tried to debunk this 100 times. And as I've got older, I thought, well, it had to just be a bear. It had to be this, because the bear is our state animal, and they're pretty plentiful in West Virginia. I am 54 years old, and I've only seen a glimpse of a bear one time in my life. So in 54 years, the bears has eluded me. So why can't another creature that has not been identified eluded me for 54 years? That's how I kind of look at it.
Bordered by Ohio to the west and Pennsylvania to the east, Weirton, West Virginia is situated on the northern panhandle of the state, on a strip of land 5 miles across. The Ohio River divides Weirton from its immediate neighbor Steubenville, with the outskirts of Pittsburgh no more than a half-hour away. The character of Weirton was vividly described in a poem written by Pastor Gary C. Lilly, on the occasion of the community's 75th anniversary. City of steel and smoke and steeples, your main street garnished with the memories of fearless men with fists of iron, shift working, hard hat wearing, track laying, crane running, bridge building, God-fearing, flag-waving, freedom-loving people, looking up through orange glow and graphite skies to Weirton Heights and Marland Heights, and seeing all the way to heaven. With an average high temperature of 82 degrees in the summer, 40 degrees in winter, Weirton enjoys a fairly comfortable year-round climate. While this is true for much of the state, elevation also plays a role, with southern highland areas boasting a mountain temperate climate, meaning summer temperatures are cooler and winters more moderate. West Virginia is also host to some of the most frequent precipitation in the United States, with some regions recording 200 days a year with either rain or snow. Sasquatch researcher Russ Jones has pointed out that many Bigfoot sightings in the Pacific Northwest have taken place at locations with geographical features, climate, and elevation that are easily approximated in West Virginia. Building on that observation, he and others have speculated that Sasquatch may move through elevation zones as the seasons change, following food sources and seeking different types of shelter. It's an intriguing hypothesis, one that appears to be both logical and traceable.
Is there activity around, like year round? And are there certain times of the year where there seems to be more activity or less?
I think that's fair to say. Is that, I always tell everybody when they have a sighting or some type of encounter, mark it on their calendar, because it seems like, in some cases it's maybe one time a year people hear them. In other cases it's a couple times a year that you'll see it. So I think that if you see them in the spring, sometimes you'll see them in the fall about that same time of the year come through. And in my mind, they're just making a circuit following the food sources and the privacy and the space that they need, that they've been raised with for generations through an area.
Peak season for me seems to be fall and spring. I don't get out and camp as much or do as much expeditions in the summer because of hot and sticky, ticks, snakes and things. But it seems like most of the activity as the leaves start changing is when they really do. I don't know if they're feeding up for the winter or they're more active. And I think they move out of the highlands in the winter months. I've been up in some really higher areas above 3,000 feet, and you can't find any wildlife at all up there hardly. I mean, birds and everything are gone. Squirrels, you can't find them. I think everything moves down toward the river bottoms. That's just my theory on it. I think we've seen it in North Carolina in the mountains there, which are a lot higher here. We've gone into areas above, almost right at 4,000 feet, and stayed and had no activity. We couldn't find bear scat, coyote scat, anything that would make you think there was wildlife in the area. Rarely any birds or anything. So I think they're seasonal. I think maybe in the spring they start moving back out up to the highlands, being large creatures. I'm sure the temperature change is good for them. I've heard people say that they move to the south side of hills to bed during the winter months, so they get that first morning sunshine. I think they move. I think they stay in areas, but I think once they exhaust the food supply, I think they move maybe in a 50-mile radius.
We did get also another one from Ohio County, and this was the sighting happened in 2014, and we got this, I think, in 2015 from Cabela's when they used to have the events down there. And there was a teenage boy and his sister. The teenage boy it was about 8:30, quarter to 9. It was in late summer. He was finishing up with his tractor, riding his tractor, and the lights were on. And his sister was up in the house, and she looked, and when the lights of the tractor went around this little bend, there was this huge ape. Like she said, it looked like a big ape. dark, standing there looking at him. So once the boy then saw it, after he saw it with the headlights, this thing ran into the woods, crashing. Again, this is another one that was crashing through the woods. And they had horses, dogs, and some other animals on this farm. It was a working farm. And they said that the horses were running up and down. They were going crazy. The dogs were barking. That whole rest of the night, they were agitated. Now, they went up there the next day, but they didn't find any. It kind of looked like something might have went through there, but nothing definite. So that's kind of what we have. There has been one or two other sightings from Ohio, from the BFRO, noises. Somebody had seen a creature, and the creature was hanging around their house, and they saw something big. It was a big shadow, and then they ended up putting solar, sensor lights. And one night they saw it again when the sensor light came on, and after that they didn't see it anymore. So that sensor light, the creature must have known not to come by that sensor light after that.
When are you seeing the most reports that are coming to you? Is there a correlation between them?
A lot of them are usually probably between April and maybe June, and then there are some sightings in the summer months, and then the fall again.
Wintertime?
I don't remember getting much in the wintertime. I mean, I do go out in the winter because, I mean, that's the prime time to go look for, the tracks and stuff, and I haven't found any.
Do you think these things would be migratory or kind of like staying at range, or?
I'd say they'd be migratory if I was going to guess. I can't see them staying in one spot very long. Looks like a coyote has to eat its weight every week. A 30-pound coyote has to eat 30 pounds to survive. And you take 30 pounds of live, living, producing whatever in out of this holler every week, first thing you know, there ain't gonna be nothing left in that holler. They're gonna have to move to the next holler. And I'd say the same thing about that. I mean,
how do they handle the frigid winter months?
Probably the same way we do. I don't think that they migrate. I think that they hold up. I think that they go into an area, there's food there. I think that they gather their food, and I think that they nest. That's what I think. I think you're dealing with something that is more intelligent than people give it credit for. That's what I also think. I know a lot of people think that we're dealing with something like, you'll hear the analogy, well, it's like an ape. Well, apes are pretty smart. I mean, I've seen video with, of apes playing Pong with their mind when hooked up to a machine. They're pretty smart. So if this thing's smarter than an ape, it's probably smarter than most things out there. It could be smarter than us. I mean, it hides from us, so it's pretty smart.
Based off the data that we've collected, I'm no longer a proponent of migration theories. I think that these things tend to stick in a 5 to 10 mile area, and they don't go out much farther than that unless they absolutely have to. I do think that they are going to be multiples in that 5 to 10 mile area, and that could be a family group or just a toleration of another couple in the area. But I don't think that we're seeing what we once thought at large was a migration possibility, where these things during the harsher weather would move south and then north, just like birds, for example. I think that these things will hunker down. They've found humans to be a reliable food source through the winter, not to be eaten, but that we have a lot of waste that we produce, and we produce a ton of excess food that they can come down and find during the harder months. There's also mushrooms that grow year-round here in West Virginia that are edible. You can find wildlife here plentifully all year round as well. So as a last resort, if you can't find any of those things, you can come down and dig in a trash bin.
Well, average, I mean, even this far south, how cold does it get?
Last week we were -19. Hibernation is, bears hibernate, obviously, right? Bears will go and they'll climb into a big hollowed out beech tree, or they'll dig a den and hibernate. But I don't see a creature like a Bigfoot being able to hibernate as large as it is. Now, I know that grizzlies and whatnot, they'll hibernate, but I don't see Bigfoot, one, having a need to hibernate, but I don't see it as a creature being what it is. I don't see it having a purpose to hibernate.
there was A boy that lives over here on Bug Ridge was riding his four-wheeler out to the other end of Bug Ridge, which puts into the road that takes you into Webster Cowan. He swears up and down that he saw a white Bigfoot cross the road right in front of him. Scared him the crap out of him. Well, he was telling this story to two other boys that lived down here on Wolf Creek. And when he told them that, where he seen it at, they just looked at each other and grinned. At that time, they was working at the Boy Scout camp down next to Oak Hill. They was working with a guy that lived over off of Powell's Mountain, going into Deal. He was going home. He had a white Bigfoot cross the road in front of him. Well, he come back to work and was telling these two boys that just heard a story from this guy that he had seen it. Well, from where he seen it cross the road and where this boy seen it over there, as the crow flies, wouldn't be 4 or 5 miles as the crow flies. Probably 10 miles by the road.
He say anything about the height?
They just said it was a white Bigfoot. Now, I got my things about that. It's wintertime. Snowshoe rabbit, he's brown. Come wintertime, he turns white. And this was wintertime when this boy seen this. Tell you for what it's worth. You know, in this country, you can see a bear from one ridge to the next in the wintertime. You know, a black bear running through the white snow. I could see how something could get by in the snow and not be seen.
There was a report in the high mountains near the ski resorts in West Virginia that, I mean, the mountains are very high, they're very steep, and, you know, say a Bigfoot that's 6 or 7 or 8 foot tall or whatever, an adult Bigfoot, they could walk down this mountain and get 2,000 or 3,000 feet lower in elevation, 20 degrees temperature difference in just a couple hours. And clearly they would recognize when a storm was coming and head down there. But, you know, there was a story about a hunter that, you know, he went out and it was, I want to say day after Christmas or day after New Year's, I don't recall which. And he had went out and was having trouble creeping along this bottom because the ice was so crunchy. And he kept hearing something down there. So eventually he just sat down and watched, and he kept hearing something again. He would look and he didn't see anything. And finally he looked and he's like, there's this ape looking at me. He's like, I can see it right through my scope. It's looking right at me. And he's like, as soon as it recognized that I was looking at it, just took off walking. He's like, you know, it did that typical Bigfoot walk. It's looking at me the whole time. And I thought it was interesting because it could have been in a much, much warmer area, but it really didn't worry about it. You know, I mean, maybe we think too much about how we would think about it and not so much about how they would think about it. You know, maybe it's up there because of all the ski resorts and all the dumpsters are up there in the trash cans, and, you know, deer are always hanging around these parks. Maybe it was easy pickings for it, and so it was worth it being up there. I don't know.
The unique, rugged topography of West Virginia produces an abundance of waterways, everything from headwater brook trout streams to rushing whitewater to rivers wide enough to transport commercial craft. In total, there are over 32,200 miles of river water coursing through the veins of the mountain state, including the New River, managed by the National Park Service. Ranging from slow-moving sand and mud-bottomed brooks to rocky whitewater rapids, the rivers of West Virginia are home to game fish such as walleye, muskie, smallmouth bass, and catfish, leading some to suggest that they would provide an ideal food source for large omnivorous beings like Bigfoot. In addition, the rivers have long served as wilderness highways, presenting a path of least resistance through forbidding territory. It seems reasonable to posit that under the right conditions, even a creature the size of Sasquatch could utilize the waterways for ease of travel, not to mention their own hydration and the opportunities to feed on both fish and other animals drawn to the water's edge. Plentiful precipitation and moderate temperatures mean that more often than not, the many life-giving elements of the river are available for whatever may need to use them.
The state, pretty much the entirety of the state, contains some amount of the Appalachian Mountains or the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. You know, sort of all of it is hard to traverse. You know, the majority of all the roads kind of go like in the easy directions, and then the hard directions are always kind of difficult. So like if you would look on a map and you'd see 2 points and you'd think, oh, those should be pretty close together. Well, if you need to travel there not by air, it's not, it's difficult. So the terrain itself is difficult to navigate and drive and that sort of thing. And then therefore, there's really only patches that are settled or developed to any real degree. And then, you know, it's not too far away from here, but there's a county nearby that's called like the birthplace of rivers. And from this one county, I think is supposed to be the watershed of like, you know, something like 8 different rivers. So due to the mountains and the drainage from those mountains, there's a lot of creeks that turn into small rivers, that turn into big rivers, that turn into lakes, and a lot of it's also really connected as well. But there's just a ton of small streams. You know, like if you were to go down the Elk River on a kayak, you know, it would probably be every several hundred yards there would be some stream or creek that feeds the Elk River itself. So there's no lack of access to water, even when it's, you know, the most remote places. There's plenty of water, there's plenty of vegetation, maybe even too much vegetation at times.
Any stories about Bigfoot being seen, encountered following or near a waterway?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. There seem to be some tracks that have been found. Right here in Braxton County, I actually took a report just up the road here where the guy was actually fishing near Wolf Creek. I think it was Wolf Creek is what it's called. He was fishing and looked up the creek, and one was along the waterway or along the creek watching him. So, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
The easiest way that we can do it here in West Virginia is when you get up into the high mountains, there's several springs all over the place. I'm sure thousands that man doesn't even know or acknowledge. And people are finding tracks around those springs because it doesn't have to go all the way down to get them. Here in the lower portion of Appalachia and through much of Appalachia, it's not that big a deal. They have to have water. My experience has been that, you know, most of the time they're not in the main hollows, they're not in the main valley during the daytime anyways. They're staying, you know, in some remote place within walking distance where they don't think that people go for whatever reason. There's a small seep or a spring. And once again, we're paying attention to, you know, if it's a winter, we're looking for a south-facing hillside. If it's a summer, we're looking for a north-facing hillside. If it's in the summer, once again, we'd be looking near a berry patch, something we can get to in 5 or 10 minutes, probably where there's not a right-of-way where, you know, you would see the four-wheelers or something like that, something that's, you know, not easy to access.
So actually at this past West Virginia Bigfoot Festival that took place in June, a gentleman came in and I talked to him for a little while, and he told me about a story that took place with him and his friend who were fishing on the Sutton Lake. And that I believe what he said was that it was like during like winter pool, like when the lake drops quite a bit. Summer pool, it's much higher. And at that time, there's a lot of exposed ground, you know, that pretty much doesn't have any vegetation on it and things like that. And that like out away from them a little ways in the bend in the lake, that there was a tall, I think he described it as basically like a black figure, but it was very big, just sort of standing at this sort of outcropping, just watching them for a while. You know, sort of him and his friend talked quietly back and forth to one another to try to figure out what that was or what they should do. And in that time, it turned and walked back up into the woods. And what this gentleman told me was that he asked his friend, like, should we go check, you know, see if there's footprints or something? And his friend was like, you can. But I'm getting out of here because one of us is going to live from this fishing trip. So they decided not to go and left. So that was just told me, like I said, this past June. But I think this story took place sometime within the last several years. Like, it wasn't super recent. I will say the whole time while he was telling me the story, he had goosebumps on him the whole time. And just retelling the story, it was affecting him viscerally.
A lot of people know that the newest national park in the United States is the New River Gorge, is the newest national park, and it was the busiest national park last year. And there was a hunter that he went deer hunting in the evening, had about an hour or two before dark, and where he had the sighting, you can see the bridge. He was that close. And I've went there and walked around myself, and he said that he saw a movement. He pulled his gun up, and he just saw a hand on a tree. Something was behind the tree. It was a big poplar tree. It was reaching its hand around, and he dropped his gun because he was afraid it was a human. But then, just something didn't seem right, and he raised it up, and he said that the hands were large and the nail beds were very dark. And 3 times he saw this creature lean out, look at him. It would blink, lean back, and he's not very far away, and he's looking through a scope. And the last time after it happened, he just didn't see it come back out. Apparently it probably just dropped over the hill right there. But I mean, it was about 20 years ago. There was a guy that was driving across the New River Gorge Bridge, and you remember once a year you have Bridge Day. It's in October. People are allowed to jump off it, and it's like 800 something feet high. And so there was a guy that parked and committed suicide. And so they knew right where he had jumped, right? Because his car's parked right there, but they never found him. I mean, it's so rugged, so steep, so rocky that they didn't, but they found him 2 years ago. It was just some people messing around on the mountainside found him, even though all the searchers couldn't. So I think that many of the things we're looking for like that, they're able to just hide in plain sight. And once again, knowing where people go and where people don't go.
Assuming Bigfoot remain in West Virginia during the coldest winter months, questions abound regarding their whereabouts. The answers might simply be found in nature and its processes, one of them being hibernation. Animals that hibernate prepare a special area like a cave or den in which they rest to let their metabolism slow dramatically. Their heartbeat slows, as does their breathing, and their body temperature drops, allowing them to conserve energy. While bears are near the top of the size chart of known hibernators, Sasquatch might do the same, calorie loading during warmer months in preparation for a winter shutdown. If it's true that Bigfoot at least frequents cave systems to escape the cold, whether in hibernation or otherwise, it has plenty of options. Most estimates arrive at a number of at least 4,200 individual caves in West Virginia, 1,800 of which are 33 feet deep or more, and 106 with over a mile of surveyed passage. Then there are the abandoned coal mines. U.S. Geological Survey reports claim that by 1980 there were 1.6 million acres of abandoned underground mines in the state, a number that has undoubtedly multiplied in the decades since. And while below-drainage mines slowly fill up with water, others simply sit idle, providing a kind of shelter for anything bold enough to venture inside. Once there, it would be virtually guaranteed to go undetected and unbothered.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question, right? Because how do they get by food-wise? You know what I mean? There's only so much roadkill. There's only so many animals that are active. I mean, I suspect in a place like West Virginia, you have 10,000 active mines, inactive mines that have not been capped or filled in. You have hundreds of thousands of cave openings, rock ledges, things like that all through Appalachia. And there's no evidence really. There's some reports where they have found some bedding material or nesting material. I found a couple of those myself, but I don't think that there's any evidence that they're really staying in those kind of places. I think that they just go to them in inclement weather. You know, coyotes, bobcats do the same kind of thing. They're not really doing that either. They're out in pine groves a lot of times where, you know, especially in Ohio, you have thousands and thousands of acres of pine groves, and the temperature is 10 to 12 degrees warmer or cooler depending upon the time of the year. So, you know, you don't have to worry about leaving your tracks in pine groves. You don't have to worry about a lot of things except for the food.
Well, caves and underground normally have
Average.
the average temperature stays constant. So it's probably conducive for an animal to take shelter in there in the wintertime. And there's a lot of caves and underground mines that connect where something like a creature could go from one area to another area without being seen.
Hancock County here especially is basically all underground mines. This was actually once we've reread like the town capital of the world. There's a lot of clay mines here. It's actually, I could even show you where there's can't get in there, but I can show you where one still is. Our friend Scott, he actually got lost. Him and his friends got lost in 1979 in one of the mines for 2 days, and it was Heather actually has the newspaper clippings that Scott sent her, and after they were able to rescue them, got them out of there, they sealed all the mine entrances because they didn't want anybody else or idiots like me to go in there and try to, which I probably, or idiots like me, which I probably would try to go in there. But so they kind of closed them, and Scott even said he's talked to some of the old timers, and they said there's underground mines everywhere here in Hancock County. Is that why they're not seen as much? Some of it makes sense. I mean, like during cold winter months, there's not as many sightings. So I don't want to say they hibernate, because even in PA, there's been sightings up on the ridge too of footprints in the snow. So I don't think that they hibernate. I just think that they don't go out as much as they only go out when they have to. Why would you want to go out in freezing weather when the average temperature is what, 48 to 50 in a cave?
48 to 52.
52 in a cave. So it makes sense, doesn't it? I think it makes sense.
Do you think they utilize caves?
Yes, I do. I think they have to. I just can't see how anything could survive 10, 15, 20 below zero weather without some type of shelter. I mean, it's great outdoorsmen, but I don't think they're, 20 below zero is hard on any animal. And but deer and other survive and get through it, but weaken them a lot. But
Heard about it, never seen it, don't doubt it. I think that makes perfect sense to me. I know there's theories that they move through the caves and kind of pop out in other locations. I don't know about that, but I would say that if I were a very large creature and I wanted to get away, that's the perfect place. And especially in weather, when the seasons change, it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, look at what we did as a species. We looked for these rock overhangs and we looked for these caves to go into. So yeah, it makes perfect sense to me.
I don't think they live in caves, because that would open up a whole box of worms there. What they would have to be able to do. So I think they may take cover in caves and stuff like that. If they didn't move, I think they would exhaust their resources in that area, especially if there was, even if it was just a small group of 2 or 3. Something that big that would need several thousand calories a day to survive. So I think they do have to move. I think they go where the food is. Wintertime, they probably, and again, do they store food? Is it possible they store food, with nuts and stuff like that? Because there's a lot of nut trees in West Virginia. I think they can take, shelter, but live? I don't think so. At least not for long periods of time.
West Virginia is not exactly known for its karst land. We do have karst lands, but it's mostly in the form of sinkholes. But there have been some reports around old mine shaft openings, which could be similar to caves. I mean, it's the same cut into the mountainside sort of deal. And it is a popular theory, rather, that during the colder and harsher weather times here in West Virginia, that these things could retreat into some of the coal mines for some sanctuary.
And I've spent many, many hours, days, months over the years in the New River Gorge, And one time I was in a gorge and I was walking along the New River, which, it's one of the oldest rivers in the world. And there's all these cliffs and these rock outcroppings. When we got close to that cliff, I heard this boom, boom. As soon as I heard, I recognized the wood knocking, and I asked her, I'm like, did you hear that? And she said, yeah. And I'm like, listen. So we heard 4 of them over about 20 seconds. But to get to that one mountain, to get up it's probably a couple of hours. And you don't really want to do it when it's warm. It's snaky. There's a lot of rocks around, snakes are out everywhere. And so when I got up just to the base of the cliff, there was a mine. And, I thought, what a perfect place. Something can stay up here if the weather's bad. There's water coming out of the mine. And, they could see me or whatever. And a long time before I ever got there, and I think that's what happened. But when I was going up there twice, I heard in the distance a knock, like they were just moving away from me, but maybe they were letting the other ones in the area that were with it know that they were doing that.
With forests as far as the eye can see, bountiful rainfall, and rich soil, West Virginia is home to a diverse array of flora and fauna that might seem like a buffet to an apex predator. The state's Department of Natural Resources claims 57 species of amphibians and reptiles, 70 wild mammals, including white-tailed deer, beaver, squirrel, muskrat, weasel, raccoon, elk, boar, rabbit, opossum, and black bear, along with 178 species of fish and nearly 300 bird species. Add to that a superabundance of naturally growing blackberries, blueberries, elderberries, grapes, hazelnuts, huckleberries, and plums, among a whole host of edible plants. And the question of what might Sasquatch eat has an answer that is self-evident. Whether it stores a cache of food in a climate-stable cave or mine, or simply consumes as much as possible before hibernation, even the outsized Bigfoot could not exhaust the resources of the West Virginia countryside.
But young, old, whatever. My grandmother and my grandparents at the time was probably in their 60s to early 70s. And even they would be like, well, don't be out there fooling around. You don't want to get the Bell Hill Beast out.
So it was at least talked about.
Right. So
even today, people talk about
it was something that was thrown around quite a bit. Let me see, probably 6-7 years ago, we had a small rental house and we had a young guy come out and for some reason he called me up one day and he was like, hey, you didn't come in my house to get my bread, did you? And I said, no, why? He said, well, I have a loaf of bread missing. And I said, well, why would you think I'd come in and steal your loaf of bread? And he's like, I'm just asking. He goes, you have a key to the house. He said, so I'm just asking. I said, okay. Well, a couple days later, he called me up, almost angry. And he's like, dude, I'm tired of playing games. And I said, what? He goes, I don't have a lot to work with right now. Where's my damn bread? And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, where's my bread? I said, I told you the other day. He goes, no, I just bought a brand new loaf, left it on my table, and it's gone. Now, the only pet that he had in the house was a pug. Mm-hmm. And pugs aren't known to jump onto tables. They don't jump. But I told him, I said, dude, I told you the other day, why would I steal your bread? And he had only lived there for maybe a year and a half. And even he said, oh, I suppose you want me to blame the Bell Hill Beast. And I looked at him and said, what do you know about the Bell Hill Beast? He goes, well, I live out here now. He goes, everybody told me about the Bell Hill Beast and don't be out after dark. So even today, you know, people still in the community talk about it. Now, who told him about the Bell Hill Beast could have been anybody in this area. But he, even to this day, like I said, it's brought up. And I told, so it became a running joke. Every time he went to get bread, I'd say, oh, you got Bell Hill Beast trees.
Yeah, I think they're opportunistic. You know, they're eating roadkill. They're, you know, I talk about treat foods, meaning that we know that if they're going to survive through the winter, they have to eat deer and elk and things like that, of course. But, you know, they would be trying to find anything else. And so through the course of the year, I think when we go, one of the things we have to try to find is, why is the Bigfoot in that area? Is it, was it going to a food source? What is the treat food in that area? What is the unusual food that you ordinarily wouldn't find? And that's where, you know, are we looking at orchards this time of the year, gardens this time of the year, things like that. So in Ohio, I remember about 15 years ago, there was some really good audio that came out of one of the state parks, Beaver Creek State Park in Ohio, because every Friday night, a couple of the Bigfoot researchers were getting the day-old rotisserie chickens from Kroger, and we're throwing them in that dumpster. And then we're leaving, you know, their audio equipment out there, and got some good recordings.
Yeah, this area has a long history of having generational encounters. Because of how remote West Virginia is and the way these hills and hollers are comprised, families will live in these hollers for generations. And these creatures, if what our theories of these things are correct, they look at us and they create a commonality with us and available food. Because we have waste, we throw food out, we have tremendous amounts of trash that get pitched, right? So over time, these creatures start coming to these locations regularly in times of, you know, low food especially, because they know that there's people going to be there, so they know that there's going to be other food sources available.
How would these things survive? That's the biggest. Skeptics are always like, well, how are they going to eat? What are they eating? How do they survive during winter? That kind of thing. Have you thought about that stuff?
In this country right here, you can, if he can deer hunt, if he can kill a deer, he's going to eat. They're skeptics. Oh, I'll tell you something. I just had a 50-year class reunion back in June. A buddy of mine I went to school with, he lives down in the Carolinas now. He's had 2 deer come up missing. He's killed them, gutted them, went to get help to come help him drag it in. They get there and the deer have disappeared. They're gone. You know, where you've ever dragged deer or not, but when you drag a deer has 2,260 hairs per square inch. When you drag a deer, it loses hair on the ground. No matter what you're dragging it on, it loses hair. He said there was no hair, no trail, leaves weren't distorted. Whatever happened to his deer was picked up and carried out of there or went straight up, one of the two. But he's had 2 deer come up missing. So I'm saying that, you know, they can be scavengers, just like, you know, a coyote. Anything a coyote finds, he eats. A bear, anything he finds, he eats. What he doesn't eat, he wallers in. You know, he'll wear it. And, you know, like right now, there's raspberries, there's blackberries, there's pawpaws coming on. The oaks are falling. There's plenty of stuff eating the woods right now.
I forget what year it was. There was a guy that I met here recently, or a couple years ago, and he said he was deer hunting nearby. And he was sitting in a tree stand, and he's seen a deer run along this ridge line, and right behind it, this Bigfoot creature was following it, running as a deer turned and went over the bank down the opposite side of the ridge. The Bigfoot followed him.
If they're going to have to consume anywhere, I would think 6,000 to 8,000 calories a day, and to be, you know, 600 to 800 pounds or what, you know. But I think deer probably take a lot of energy for them to catch, and so they move with abundance of food wherever the food is. You know, I think they probably become more herbivores in the summer months when there's abundance of berries and vegetables around and stuff. I know, heard of them, you know, raiding apple orchards and doing certain things in certain times of year, getting different types of food. So they're definitely herbivores like us, or not herbivores, but omnivores like us. And I think in the winter months it requires more energy to stay warm. So I think maybe they become more carnivores in the winter, and move around with the abundance or the supply of the food chain.
You know, in order for Bigfoot to live year round, it would have to be an omnivore, right? So it just can't be something that eats plant matter. You know, I mean, you have moose and elk, and largely they're eating those things, but you know, this is an ape, it's a primate, so you know, it's had to have developed in order to do that. So in the winter, it needs high calorie foods. That means it's always going to be after deer. Now, I talk about the term, what I call treat foods. And so aside from the winter months, whenever I take a report or when I go to a location, one of the first things I want to know all the time is, you know, why is that animal here? Of all the places, I mean, I'm telling you, when I go to all these places in West Virginia, I take these reports and I get out and I'm like, this is no different than any other place in West Virginia. They're all awesome. I mean, they're all places that could support something like this. So with treat foods, I think that they have a travel based on foods that maybe have sugars that they can't get readily available through the rest of the year. It might be berry patches that are in areas that are hard to get to, that four-wheelers or roads are not around. It may be Grandma Jones's huge orchard that she has, that she's funny and doesn't want anybody on her land, and it's all posted. It may be someone else's garden. It may be ramps in the spring. It may be morels, whatever it happens to be, but that's how I believe that they are moving around after those particular things, eating a wide variety of things, roadkill, dumpster diving, whatever it happens to be, taking a lot of reports out of areas where you know, there's gun ranges, there's remote parts of park, and there's trash cans there, and people are throwing things in those trash cans and they're after them.
Any stories you've taken about Bigfoot foraging or eating vegetables or fruit?
The only one that not witnessed, the only one I can think of that was the one that was in Denise, West Virginia, where the guy was actually putting food out, and the food was, you know, quickly disappearing. He was putting out stuff from the table he would put out, and thinking it was a bear at first, or he'd put out garden scraps, or then when he started noticing it was disappearing quick, he started actually putting, he actually put watermelons and stuff like that out, and it was being taken. But it wasn't witnessed, he didn't witness it happening.
Food sources, yeah. We find the most of these in areas where there's a lot of food sources, natural food sources. You know, we found areas where there's mushrooms, where the ground cherries, for example, wineberry in particular. You know, there's enough food there for these things. If we're dealing with physical creature, that's where you're going to find it.
In the central portion, around the Hocking Hills area, there was a reservoir area. It was around 1,200 acres. It was surrounded by cornfields. All the farmers that lived around it all had Bigfoot sightings there. There was literally no roadkill anywhere around there. But that's much too small of acreage for something to be there. So in my mind, it was like there was an old one that was dying. There was a young one. I mean, who can say what it was? But for whatever reason, they were staying in that area when they could have moved down to, you know, Clear Creek or one of those areas where there's a lot more woods, just maybe 8 or 10 miles away across country. But, you know, I think that that's the primary thing, is if there's not food, they had to move on.
I was hunting, and I was switching jobs, so I only had a couple days between. So I wanted to go the evening and try to get something. So I'd shot a small doe, and I went and looked. I couldn't find any blood or anything like that, and so I kind of give up for that evening. And I said, well, I'll go out in the morning and look. So I went out and looked. Couldn't find much. I mean, I found a little bit of blood, but no trail like leading me to, you know, pursue it a lot. So I'm like, well, I only got a limited amount of time here, so I got to get something. So I started hunting again, and I shot a deer, and I got it. I found it. So in the process, my buddy was with me, and I said, hey, I said, you want to come with me? And I said, so we can drag this thing, because I said, I ain't gonna be able to do it by myself. He said, yeah. So we went down this like little 4-wheeler path by my house. As I'm walking, it's like kind of a marshy area. I go across this marshy area and I see my crossbow bolt stuck in the ground, like straight up and down. I'm like, what is that? And I mean like in the ground, like I had to get a hold of it and pull it. It took some force to get it out. I kind of thought that was weird. I was like, what is that? So I was looking around a little bit and I seen this deer laying over there. It was the deer that I'd shot the night before, but it was torn completely in two. Like not cut, torn. Like something grabbed hold of the hind quarter and the front quarter and just pulled it in 2 pieces. I've never seen anything like that in my life. I hunted my whole life. And I remember looking at the deer and thinking, well, what could have done this? You know, like what could physically grab something? Because there's no knife marks or nothing like that, no cuts. I mean, I could see where the arrow went through, but nothing else. I mean, and like the entrails were all spread out there, and I was like, what? You know, a coyote didn't grab it and pull it apart. You know, couldn't. I don't believe it could do that. I've never seen anything like that. But no, I mean, nothing else weird happened. It was just that. But yeah, well, I quit hunting for a while. It messed me up, man. Like it kind of got to me a little bit, and then I quit hunting for several years, and then I wasn't like. I got different opinions. Like I think going out in the middle of the woods with a bat and beating on a tree and hooting and hollering, it's kind of stupid. I don't think. I mean, I've been hunting my whole life. I don't think you're going to find anything doing that, other than people mimicking you and making fun of you. I think that if you're more likely to see something if you're just going about your everyday business. Like if you're a hiker, if you're going hiking, you might see something. You know, if you're a fisherman or a hunter, vice versa. I think that you have a better chance of that, not actively seeking something by doing, because I mean, if it's as smart as everyone says it is and thinks it is, and I mean, a deer can smell you 300 yards away. What do you think it can do? Then I went to the Bigfoot conference over in Ohio. And like I'm listening to all these people telling these stories, and there was some similar ones to mine. I'm like, well, and then I just started hearing a lot of stories about mine. And then another guy that I knew, he grew up not far from where I live, and him and his sister had seen one. When I was telling my story to him one day, he told me his story. But he was like, I think 10 or so. His sister was somewhere around the same age, and he said that they were playing like by the road in like a turnaround. And he said that his sister like went ghost white and like was just staring. And he said, "What's wrong?" And she couldn't say nothing. So he turned around and he said it was this thing. He said it looked like a basketball player. He said it was just like real tall and lanky, and he said just covered in hair. So he said they freaked out, and he gathered up his sister and they ran back to the house. And his dad and his uncle were sitting on the porch. He says, "Hey," he says, "there's a monkey up there," and it just scared us. The guy's like, "Well, we'll go look for it." So they went and looked for it, never did find it or anything like that. But my buddy, he said, "Man," he said, "it scared me unbelievably." He said, "When I was a little kid," he said, "I never seen anything like that." He said, "I never thought anything like that or anything." But
are there a lot of like animal mutilation reports in connection with Bigfoot encounters, or animal mutilations that are believed to be like related to Bigfoot?
Well, there's some, especially with the with Bigfoot. I know, you know, if all of the Bell Hill sightings were of a Bigfoot, then there were some animal kills. They've seen like Bigfoot kill a hog and carry it over their thing. So we live here, right about 4 miles from us is Bell Hill. Mm-hmm. This is one of the most enduring legends here in Hancock County, the Beast of Bell Hill. So the story on that goes, in the early to mid 80s, there was a series on Bell Hill, which is Bell Hill itself. It's a road. It's only about 1.5 miles, right? A little under 2. There was a series of animal mutilations. People were hearing screams in the woods. In one case, somebody found a deer up in a tree. In another, there was a grain in a barn. The barn was broken into. All the grain was eaten or taken. And people didn't know what it was. They said everything from a mountain lion, because a mountain lion will take a kill up a tree, to aliens, to Bigfoot, okay? Yeah, you did tell me, I believe last time I was down here, about the incident with the calf?
There was one incident that rattled me, and like I said, there was never any proof of this, but it was, I'd say 3 or 4 years after that. It was calving season. We went, and it wasn't uncommon whenever the cattle was getting ready to drop their calves. They would go up onto our farm, into the brush, into the thickets. They would drop their calves, keep them for a day or so. Once the calf was strong enough to walk, then they would bring it back down to the barn with the herd. So we had cows that would occasionally disappear at calving season. There was one cow that I was very fond of. I mean, we raised the calves, so of course we named them and everything as kids. And I noticed the cow wasn't coming down to the barn at nights with the rest of the herd. And then the next night, there was a second cow that just wasn't there. We gave them a couple days because of the situation. And so the weekend rolled around, my uncle said, let's go up on the hill and try to find the cows. And I said, okay. So I jumped on the back of the tractor, we went up, and coincidentally, where I seen what I believe was the Bell Hill beast, or, creature, that same plateau, that same field, we got there, and there was both the cows that was missing, totally dismembered. They were ripped, scattered. It was not just a hunter accidentally shot them. Mm-hmm. Something had maimed them severely. Mm-hmm. And you're talking a cow bone, leg bone. It's pretty sizable. Mm-hmm. Some of their legs have been removed, and just in pieces. It was never explained. There was never a answer to the question that put a period at the end of the sentence for me. They wiped it off as 2 dead cows, and that was it. I mean,
during that time, do you remember, was there any local media coverage? Because we didn't obviously live there then. Or was there a buzz or people talking about, hey, our cattle's missing, there's unexplained noises, animal kills. Do you remember any of that?
Not so much media, but what I noticed was, like I said earlier, it was very common back then for people to say, be here by this time so the Bell Hill beasts don't get you. Stupid little things that we would find. It was always the running joke, oh, Bell Hill beast did it. Oh. The Bell Hill beast was a very active part of my youth. Everybody living out there talked about it frequently, whether it be jokingly, threateningly, whatever. But everybody in that community knows of the Bell Hill beast. They just incorporated it into their everyday life, to keep us kids in line and different things like that. But young, old, whatever. My grandmother and my grandparents at the time was probably in their 60s to early 70s. And even they would be like, well, don't be out there fooling around. You don't want to get the Bell Hill beast out.
So it was at least talked about.
Right. So
even today, people talk about it.
It was something that was thrown around quite a bit.